For example, there were a lot of dispute around the Olympic branding, Olympic sponsorships. There is a very big dispute between Visa and the local bank in China. Another thing is about the physical, I'm not sure how to, the arbitration. The Olympic Committee set up a tribunal for the arbitration of the games. So I'm not very sure that CCLS could create some new modules for the to training some students who could contribute maybe some legal services or the arbitration services for these big games.
So there's a possible job opportunities there, and there's the conflict between the top sponsors like Visa at this level and local sponsors within a host city.
I think we did enough. We contributed Farisha, who did her undergraduate degree at Queen Mary, and then she did the advanced trademark course at CCLS, so we are happy with that. It's you know, from an educational perspective, what we want to do is enable people to use the tools, and we're doing that in all our courses. Sports law and everything that is linked with the Olympics is perhaps very topical, but all the discussion that we're making about intellectual property and the Olympics is not different from discussion we make about intellectual property and other areas of activity. So what we're trying to do is make sure that all the people who come to us use very effectively what they learn with us. Now for the future, we are looking at a certificate in sports law, and so we will be doing this more. We will look in greater detail.
So there's a lot of interested students, and there's a couple of questions there.
I just want to make a quick advertisement.
There's a microphone.
I just wanted to make a quick advertisement. Queen Mary is actually establishing a series of lectures based around sports in the body and the Olympics, which will be starting in January of next year.
Great plug.
And I think it's I'm looking for Nigel here, the 4th or the 6th of December, there is an Olympics legacy lecture coming out of the geography department. And we've got a small working group now, and there'll be a brochure coming out quite quickly. So there's quite a lot happening already, pulling together the various things, because Queen Mary, obviously, with its location and its great connections, is just perfectly poised to help.
Absolutely. What a great chance to say that. And gentleman there, maybe he's got a question or...
It's sort of a question. I think one of the interesting things about this is what Professor Oswick has said about it being a cultural matter and the commercial balance with it. I mean, one of the things that's quite intriguing about our law about the Olympics is Martin describing himself as an Olympian in certain circumstances is an infringement, and only through the good nature of local do they not take action against some of these issues. And arguably, this could be an infringement just having the word Olympian on the board. I mean, I'm not suggesting that local would take action, but it does seem that if you're going to have the cultural aspect of the Olympics protected, the integrity of the Olympic Games as an ideal protected, it's very difficult to have an intellectual property and a branding framework which is quite so pervasive over a cultural icon. And I think it's a very difficult thing
I think that's a brilliant point, and Farisha's desperate to answer it.
I think there is some misunderstanding and myth and legend surrounding our legislation and how it actually works, because Martin is an Olympian. Of course he can say he's an Olympian. It's a statement of fact. He can stand up and say, I'm an Olympian. So it's only when you start adding commercial layers on top, and when he starts commercialising off the back of being an Olympian, tying it into our games, that's when you start to move into the grey area and then into the murky waters. But you can absolutely make statements of fact. You can continue to let people know who you are.
So how grey does it get before you dive in?
It's all a question of context, and it's not a really good answer to this question because it really does depend on fact pattern and scenario. I mean, you'll know as an Olympian, the British Olympic Association, they have frameworks and guidance for, you know, how Olympians move forward and have careers and things after the Games. And all this is fine, you know, potential Olympic and Paralympic athletes can be sponsored by people that aren't our partners. All these things still happen and do happen, and it's absolutely fine. And you're not in trouble because you've, you know, necessarily said the word Olympics or Paralympics. And in fact, you can be in trouble without using those words. It's all going to be down to context, presentation, and what you do.
Can I just check, looking over to my left, on time? How are we doing on time? It's a close run thing, so either there's a final question or I'm going to ask the guys to say something in conclusion. So it could be over to you. So guys, maybe just to sum up where you think we've reached.
Well, at the risk of being controversial and not being a lawyer, the Olympics is different to Bart Simpson, you know, so I think there is a difference. The Olympics is more generic, more inclusive, more kind of pervasive than that. So I think there was something to be said about it. Also, the idea that people establish intellectual property doesn't mean ownership. I'd use, fun example, I'd use Budweiser beer. Budweiser Budvar was produced in Czechoslovakia. Those of you know about beer, and I know a bit about beer, and played rugby. That was produced centuries before the American Budweiser then established copyright over the name, and then stopped Czechoslovakia that produced it 200 years earlier, then using it. So I don't think that the idea of establishing kind of ownership of a brand is necessarily a good measure of equity or fairness. And I can accept the legal position because that's where we are, but I think the spirit of the Olympics, which transcends the bounds of legal responsibility.
Spyros?
It was Czech immigrants from Budva that wanted to drink beer in the US.
Yes,
so,
but it was 200 years later that they established copyright over something that occurred 200 years prior.
No, I agree with Cliff that there are issues there, but I think the discussion we're making about trademarks and branding and who owns what, it just simply reflects the current controversy about what you have stated. Who owns the Olympics? The 100 middle-aged men who are running this, or the world? So that is something that we have to reconsider, if you like, from the top rather than looking at trademark law. This is simply an aspect of a much broader discussion.
And finally, Farisha.
Yeah, just to say, as I opened, you know, the London 2012 Olympic Games and Paralympic Games, they are for everyone. That's like one of our biggest messages. You know, there is so many ways that people can get involved, you know, volunteering, becoming ambassadors, you know, just looking for their own personal best and maybe doing something a little different because we've won something a little different. And so there's so much that people can get involved with, and all I do is ask for that little bit at the corner, the actual brand, that they just leave that bit because it's that bit that enables us to pay for all the rest to happen.
Brilliant. There we go. There's the current state, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.